Shalom Aleichem. The title of our discussion tonight is What if part of the Minyan leaves early? And the question is, what happens if you start something that requires a Minyan and then some of the people leave? So do you continue doing what you were doing? So this is based on a Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi says that you continue, and it lists a number of different things. Now, this Yerushalmi is on the Mishnah and Megillah that discusses those things that require 10 people. Now, what I would like to discuss today is a letter by Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, in his early years. So there's a collection of his letters mostly to his father, but also to other Abayim. There's letters to his uncle. There's letters to different uncles, and there's letters to for instance, Rav Hutner, and others that he corresponded with, excuse me. But a lot of them are between Rav Soloveitchik and his father, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, who eventually was in Boston and Yeshiva University. It's interesting because you see the young Rav Soloveitchik developing. Now, we're going to be focusing specifically on Birkas Kohanim, on the issue of a minyan for saying the blessing for the Kohanim, and we're going to follow through Rav Soloveitchik's discussion. Now he writes there. First of all, he opens with the Rambam. The whole Sefer is organized according to the Rambam, and the Rambam lists those things which require 10. This is in Perek Chet of Hilchos Tefillah, and we'll just start a little bit before where he mentions V'chin lo yeh echad mevarich birkos shema ve'akol shomim ve'onim acharav amen ela ba'asora. Chazal had something called Pores al Shema, where one person would read the blessings of the Shema, and everybody would listen and answer Amen. That's called Pores al Shema. Ve'nomrim Kaddish ela ba'asora. Kaddish also requires 10. Ve'ena kohanim nosein es kapeim ela ba'asora. The Kohen do Birkas Kohanim, literally lift up their hands only with 10. Ve'akohanim min haminyan. The Kohanim are counted towards that. Shekol asara Yisrael hein hanikraim Eda. 10 of Israel are referred to as Eda, congregation. Shenemar, curiously, the pasuk that Chazal quote for this is Ad Masai la Eda hara'ah hazos, referring to the 10 spies, minus Yoshua and Kalev, who were righteous spies. But how long is this bad Eda? Now, Eda is a congregation. Value Asara, they were 10. Shariatzu Yoshua v'Kalev. And then the Rambam continues, V'chol davar shebekadusha lo yeh el b'soch Eda b'Yisrael. Anything that involves Kedusha should only be amongst an Eda. Shenemar b'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Israel. I should be sanctified amongst the children of Israel. All of these things, if they started with 10, and some of them left, even though they're not supposed to leave. But if they do, the rest of them should finish off. And he goes on to speak about who's counted for the 10, where should they be, etc., etc. Now, Birkas Kohanim is part of this list. Now, my knee-jerk reaction when I see the Gemara, when I see this Rambam, is that the Rambam summarizes in the beginning of Halacha Vav, B'chol davar shebekdusha lo yeh b'soch hasara. Anything that is a davar shebekdusha, a matter of kedusha. So all the above, which included Parei Sel Shema, Kaddish, Birkas Kohanim, even continues. He proceeded with Tfilas Hatzibur. That was in Halacha Dal, which I neglected to mention. V'keitzad Tfilas Hatzibur ye'echad mispal b'kol Rambam kol shomim ve'eson enosim bo pachos me'asar gedolim u'vnei chorin. You only do it with 10. So my knee-jerk reaction would be all of these things are defined as a davar shebekdusha, a matter of holiness, and there's a requirement for 10. The pasuk says, "V'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Israel." I will be sanctified amidst the children of Israel, and Chazal make a drasha based on this word toch and the definition of Eda, and fine, not so simple. First of all, as Rav Soloveitchik goes on, Zohi. Let's get my here. Let's make it a little larger. Mishnah Megillah. It's a Mishnah Megillah. V'samach Rambam. V'zel Deshono. The Rambam says what we read. All these, if you started with 10, and some leave, you continue. Chenu lehadibri Yerushalmi Megillah. That's a Yerushalmi Megillah. Dafa Nesias Kapayim. Ika Osa Alecha. That Alecha applies to Nesias Kapayim. Applies to Birkas Kohanim. So everything seems to be very peaceful, very nice. Fine. V'lechora mizeh muchach techol dina Nesias Kapayim ba'asar hu bein Rabbanon. That seems to imply that the rule of Birkas Kohanim being with 10 is a rabbinic law. Dimu din deoraisa. If it was a biblical law, my mahani emischila basar. Why should it be enough just to begin with 10? 10 should be needed for the entire thing. Dimu din deoraisa my mahani emischila basar mikol makam ena sar b'shasa bracha kula. You need 10 for the whole bracha. So biblical requirements, we don't say you just need in the beginning of what you're doing. Biblical requirements you need for the entire thing that you're doing. So, examples. You need Kohanim to do Birkas Kohanim. We don't say that as long as the Kohen begin, the Israeli should finish. So you say, come on, that's an extreme example. There's a requirement of Kol Ram. There's a requirement of Birkas Kohanim being in a certain volume of voice, which itself is a subject of discussion, and we'll get to it. But we don't say that only applies to the beginning of Birkas Kohanim, but as long as the beginning was loud enough, the rest you can whisper. We don't say that. We say that the requirements of Birkas Kohanim should apply. The biblical requirements of Birkas Kohanim should apply for the whole thing. So that's question number one. Now, the Rambam Megillah, the Ran actually wrote that. That's a rabbinic law. And that seems to be the case. When you look at the Gemara and it quotes all these things, it has this list, and then it quotes the source. And it seems to be the same source as the others in the list, which includes certain blatant davar shebekdusha items. When I look at my Rambam again, so I'm not so convinced, because the Rambam lists Tefillah B'tzibur, he lists Birkas, he lists Porei Sel Shema, he lists Kaddish, and he lists Birkas Kohanim, and then he said, Shekol Asorim Yisrael Heiman Hikraim Eda. Then a new halacha, again, assuming that the breakup of these halachot is accurate, b'chol davar shebekdusha lo yeh b'toch edam Yisrael. Every davar shebekdusha should also be part of an edah. Now, is he saying that all of the above are davar shebekdusha, or is he now starting a new section? Again, the simple thing I would say he's referring to all of the above. The only thing is, there is a sifrei. The sifrei, the Midrash Halacha, at Parshas Naso on Birkos Kohanim, so it has a string of drashas on Amor Lahem. You should say to them, Sheyeh kol kahal kulo shomea. The entire kahal, the entire congregation should hear. V'hainu b'tzibur. Well, that seems to be a biblical halacha that is contingent upon there being a tzibur. And a tzibur is 10, a community, which is 10. Harei de'ika gzeres hakasav miyuchedes. There's a biblical drasha which teaches us that we require 10 for Nesias Kapayim. So, source number one seemed to be that Birkas Kohanim is a davar shebekdusha, just like everything else. Source number two, there seems to be a derivative of the law of everybody hearing, and the everybody is a kahal, is a congregation. That's implying that Birkas Kohanim must be for 10. And the Shiltos, that's Rav Achai Gon. So when he opens his halachas about Birkas Kohanim, he says, "Demechayve Kohani livrucha l'Yisrael b'kahala," that the Kohanim are commanded to bless Israel in a congregation. Have a look, says Rav Soloveitchik in the Netziv B'Hamek Shela. So he brought this sifrei as the source for the halacha of the Shiltos. So and therefore, says Rav Soloveitchik, it turns out that the issue of a community of a kahal of 10 is part of the rule of kol ram. It's interesting. I would have never thought of that. I would thought kol ram is telling me the decibel level of the speakers. But according to this, there's a system of Birkas Kohanim which involves the Kohanim giving the bracha to the kahal, to the tzibur. That tzibur must be a minyan, and that's what defines kol ram. That's what defines a loud voice or a high voice. As he says, v'zeu shi'ura b'din kol ram. That all 10, the kahal, have to listen. And there are other approaches to kol ram. And he brings the Rishalmi Sota that says, kol ram is lo katan v'lo gadol lo beinoni. You don't scream like Yivarechecha. You don't have to scream that, but you don't whisper. You do it in a kol ram means a loud enough voice that it's audible, an audible voice. But that's not what the Sifrei says. That's what the Yerushalmi says. Now, it doesn't say that Birkos Kohanim should be in 10. Again, it says Birkos Kohanim should be in kol ram, that the kahal should be able to hear it. But since we see that a biblical requirement is dependent on the kahal hearing, so we see that kahal is a halachic requirement of Birkas Kohanim. And that seems to be a biblical level halacha. Otherwise, why would you make Birkas Kohanim's kol ram dependent on the kahal? So now, once again, it seems to be against the Ran that the Sifri and the Shiltos would seem to clearly hold this opinion. It seems to be that Birkas Kohanim has a biblical level requirement of 10. But if that's the case, why? What's with this Yerushalmi? This Yerushalmi seems to say that that 10 is a requirement only at the beginning of Birkas Kohanim. So that's our issue. So once again, um, Birkas Kohanim requires 10. The 10 is in the Mishnah and Megillah, and the 10 is brought down in the Rambam. Fine. What's the source of that? So your simple knee-jerk reaction is it's a davar shebekadusha. It's a matter of holiness. Why is it a matter of holiness? Because the divine name is mentioned, and we're blessing with the divine name. And just like we say, v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, the divine Shem Hashem will be sanctified through the people of Israel, Kiddush Hashem, and the same thing with Kadosh 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 Hashem Tzvakos Meloch Haaretz Kvodo, and the like. So similarly, you have just like you have Kaddish, Shema, Chazoras Hashatz. So you have Birkas Kohanim, and in the centerpiece is bless. Here's blessing with the name of God. Here's unifying the name of God. Here's praying to God, and here's Yeshmei Rabba Mavorach Leolam Elom Me'almaya, sanctifying God's name. So that's these 4 items that the Rambam lists here: Chazor Sashatz, Poris El Shema, Kaddish, Birkas Kohanim. They all involve this, at the centerpiece of it, the divine name in some way, blessing, sanctifying, praying to, declaring its unity, and therefore that would be my knee-jerk reaction. It's a davar shebekadusha. It's one of these rabbinic laws called a davar shebekadusha. There is a biblical pasuk of v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, but that seems to be the source for Kiddush Hashem, as the Rambam mentions in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah. But here there seems to be a rabbinic 10. And the Ran says that explicitly. And our inclination would be to say that the Rambam would say likewise. However, there is this Sifrei that says, that learns out what seems to be a biblical source for 10, which is that Birkas Kohanim has to be loud enough so that the congregation, so that the kahal hears it. And the Shiltos clearly includes 10 as a biblical requirement. I will mention that the Rambam, when he lists the requirements of Birkas Kohanim later on in Hilchos, in Perek Tedvav of Hilchos Tefillah, and he goes through again, the headline of the Perek is Shisha Devarim Monim Nesias Kapayim. There's 6 things that will withhold being able to do Birkas Kohanim. Speech, Mumin, Avera, Shanim, Yayin, Tumas Hayadayim. But then when he gets to listing the requirements of Birkas Kohanim, at the end of the Perek, after he finishes his 6, so he says, Nesias Kapayim Basar v'Kohanim in a Minyan. So he returns this, he reviews this halacha once again. Now, once again, is it like some of the commentaries say here, like Rabbeinu Manoch, L'fishu b'chlal davar shebekdusha? It's a davar shebekdusha. But Rav Soloveitchik wants to explain Birkas Kohanim with 10 according to the Sifrei, yet still understand this halacha of the Yerushalmi, that if you start Birkas Kohanim with 10 and some of the minyan leaves, so you continue. Now, just a word in terms of practical halacha. There's shuls that this never comes up. There's shuls that these kinds of things are always coming up. There's shuls where they struggle to get a minyan, and sometimes people have to leave, and sometimes latecomers are not able to sync with the early ones, and then you'll have these halachas might end up being halacha l'maisa. So that's what we're looking for, is a solution to how can we sync these? How can these two things be in sync? The a biblical requirement for 10, and yet if they leave, you still finish off. So says Rav Saliv, Asher nira de midoraisa nemar b'hamechayev shel birkas kohanim. That biblical halacha is in what he refers to as the mechayev of birkas kohanim, that which requires, kicks off the requirement of birkas kohanim. Now, in halacha, in halachic analysis, we refer to sometimes as to the mechayev halacha, that which creates an obligation, and then the actual obligation itself. So there must be a kahal, there must be a congregation, but that congregation creates the obligation of birkas kohanim. Kol ram, speaking in a voice that the congregation would hear, that's a requirement from the beginning to the end. And even if part of the people leave, you still have to speak in a voice loud enough that the kahal, that the minyan of 10 would hear. But the minyan itself is only part of what obligates birkas kohanim. So if there's a minyan, you start birkas kohanim. Mashenken halacha shel Yerushalmi dim hischilu gomrim, that you finish off nemra be'etzem achefza shel habracha v'kiyuma de'enu ela ba'asora v'zeo rak min rabbanan. So that's something about not the mechayev, that which triggers the obligation, but that's referring to the obligation itself. And that rabbinic law includes this, we'll call it a leniency, that if part of the people leave, you still finish. Therefore, he says, if they started, the mechayev of tzibur, that which triggers the obligation exists, well, you finish it off. So that's the halacha. Now, Rav Soloveitchik adds with 2 points. Number one, there are, or Rav Soloveitchik in his last paragraph says, besides this biblical halacha, there are 2 rabbinic halachas of the tzibur in birkas kohanim. There's a biblical halacha that there be a tzibur, a community, a minyan, to trigger the obligation. But he says there is a law of tzibur that applies to what he calls the cheftza of the bracha, the blessing itself, not just creating the obligation of the blessing, and that is a davar shebekadusha. In other words, the Rambam does affirm that birkas kohanim itself is a davar shebekadusha. And that's why I was emphasizing that when you read the Rambam, it seems to be that he throws this in along with the other davar shebekedushas. Rav Soloveitchik wants to understand, though, if we have this sifrei, so to speak, lurking in the background, how does that fit into the picture? Answer: there's a tzibur that is a biblical trigger for the obligation, but birkas kohanim has another component of tzibur, a rabbinic component of tzibur, which is it's a davar shebekadusha like other davar shebekedushas. But then there's another halacha, v'su ikadin acher shel tzibur hamisparech. There's another component of tzibur at a rabbinic level once again, which is the community should be blessed. Now, what does that mean? So, a little background. There is a dispute amongst the Rishonim. Again, where you put the line of Rishonim, I'm not sure, but the Ritva and the Sefer Charedim. Sefer Charedim was Rav Elazar Azkari. Was a little later. He was one of those in Sfat at the times of the Arizal, at the times of Rav Yosef Karo, Maribe Rav Elazar Azkari. Rav Elazar Azkari holds that there's part of the biblical mitzvah Birkas Kohanim is for the Israelites to be blessed. Not just for the Kohanim to bless, for the Israelites to be blessed. And that's why Rav Shlomo Zalman, I saw quoted as saying that if you're in the middle of Shmona Esrei, you're davening along Shmona Esrei, and the tzibur gets to Birkas Kohanim, you should pause and wait till after Birkas Kohanim to continue your Shmona Esrei. Why? Because you're davening, and that's a rabbinic law. But there might be a biblical law, according to the Sefer Charedim, Rav Elazar Azkari, there's a biblical law of being blessed. So you should have to concentrate, focus on the blessing that's being given to you as part of the tzibur. Plus, in one of the sidurim that we have in our house, it actually has a little notation there, have kavana to be blessed. Again, in Eretz Yisrael, we say Birkas Kohanim every day. In Sephardi shuls, also in Chutz La'aretz, they say Birkas Kohanim every day. That's probably connected with the issue of joy. So here Birkas Kohanim is every day, and it has the notation of the siddur as you're doing that, as you're doing this mitzvah. So have in mind the mitzvah of being blessed. But the Ritva seems to be clear that it's only a mitzvah on the Kohanim, and there's not a mitzvah on the Israelites to be blessed. Now, I saw this whole thing developed in an article in a sefer called Pri Tzion, which I had never seen before. Now, so the proof that there's an issue of a community being blessed is a Rambam. The Rambam says in Perek Tedvav Halacha Tet as follows. Now, what happens if you have a shul that is all Kohanim? So the halacha is that Birkas Kohanim is with 10, and Kohanim are counted towards the Minyan. Beis HaKnesses shekula Kohanim. What if a shul is totally Kohanim? Kula nosin eskapeim. They all do the Birkas Kohanim. So that would be something that I will never experience, which is a shul that is I will never see, as far as I know, a shul where the Kohanim are all doing Birkas Kohanim and there's no Yisraelim there or no Levine there, because I'm a Levi, I'm not a Kohen. Just like I'll never see a Kohen getting the first two Aliyahs. So, because I'm a Levi. So, Ulamiyin mevorchim, la'achim shabat tzafon, la'achim shabat darom. They're making the blessing for their brethren that aren't in shul, but they're making brethren for their brothers. They're making the blessing for their brothers. Who answers amen? The women and the children. Now, interesting halacha, and this is what Rav Soloveitchik is building on, that there's a din of a tzibur being blessed. Ve'im nish'ar sham asara kohanim yeser alei l'she'alu laduchan. If there's 10 left, ha'asara onim amen ve'ashar mevorchim. The 10 answer amen, and the rest make the blessing. So says Rav Soloveitchik, Harei de'ika din miyuchad bebirkas kohanim she'at tzibur ha'misparech v'onei amen. You see that there's a special halacha that there be a community, a minyan that is being blessed, because we see if we have 11 kohanim, if we have 15 kohanim, so we make sure that 10 stay and don't do birkas kohanim, and they answer amen, and they're a tzibur. That's a wild halacha. Afal pi she'eino me'akev de'akohanim in a minyan. you Kohanim count towards a minyan, so you have a minyan already. But you see that there's an extra halacha of a minyan that is being blessed. So those are the three components, according to Rav Soloveitchik, of a minyan in Birkas Kohanim. Number one, based on the Sifri, that kahal is part of the system of Birkas Kohanim for the shiur, for the extent of Kol Ram. How loud should Birkas Kohanim be? Loud enough that a kahal hears it, that the tzibur hears it, and that's what the Shiltos writes. That part of the biblical level of Birkas Kohanim is to do it in a tzibur, and excuse me, and that's based on the Sifrei Amor Lahem, that the cows should listen. However, the Yerushalmi Din that if you start Birkas Kohanim with 10 and some of them leave, that still exists, because the biblical halacha is just if there's a tzibur that creates an obligation, it's a mechayev of Birkas Kohanim. But it doesn't have to be something that accompanies Birkas Kohanim from beginning to end. Kol Ram does, but kahal is a shiur of Kol Ram. It's the extent of how loud the voice should be. That's something that must accompany Birkas Kohanim. But you see, though, that a kahal is a biblical aspect of the requirement of Birkas Kohanim. Then there are two rabbinic levels of Birkas Kohanim. Number one is it's a davar shebekdusha, like these other davar shebekdushas, and what we're suggesting is that those mitzvahs where the centerpiece is surrounds the Shem Hashem, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Tefillah to Hashem, Porei Shal Shema, Kaddish, Yiskadal V'Yiskadash Shmei Rabbah. So and Birkas Kohanim, where you're blessing with the Shem Hashem. So that's a davar shebekdusha, and the pasuk of V'Nikdashti B'Soch B'nei Yisrael, and B'toch Ha'ida, and Ada is 10. So that's a second aspect of Birkas Kohanim, minyan for Birkas Kohanim. And a third aspect of a minyan for Birkas Kohanim is from this interesting halacha about a shul which is only Kohanim. If you have more than 10, so you have 10 who will answer Amen, and the other Kohanim will say the blessing. So, ironically, you could have one shul which has only 10 Kohanim, they're all going to do Birkas Kohanim. Another shul, I guess, that has 11 Kohanim, you would have one doing Birkas Kohanim, and the 10 Kohanim answering Amen, which apparently is part of this halacha of Tzibur HaMitbarech. Rav Soloveitchik seems to understand that not as a biblical level halacha, like the Sefer Charedim does, but as a rabbinic level halacha. Again, the Sefer Charedim says it as a svara. The Ritva says it doesn't. There is no such halacha. And that's what I wanted to share with you. And we had the ability of seeing the young Rav Soloveitchik, who in that family, the Rambam is really central. I don't know if there's anybody where the Rambam is so central. The Rogatchover was like that. The Yemenites are like that. But the Soloveitchiks. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, his sons, his grandsons, and that whole direction, the Rambam is very, very, very central, this whole sefer of the letters, it's organized according to the order of the Rambam. It's not organized chronologically or anything like that. And again, most of the letters there are Rav Soloveitchik and his father. And there's some beautiful, he signs off in Avicha Mokircha Ve'oavcha Hamachake L'Tshuvatcha. Your father who esteems you, holds you in high esteem, and loves you, and is waiting for your response. Yikirei nafshi, precious ones of my soul, etc. And these are the halacha correspondence between Rav Soloveitchik and others. As a young person, some of them in Berlin, some of them in Boston, here and there, some of them in Vilna. That's the sefer, beautiful sefer. Okay, Baruch haba atzlacha. Thanks for joining.